Hello and welcome to another episode of Chasing Hope with me, Katherine Abraham. When you turn on the TV or when you are watching another love story, what is the first thing that you notice? Almost 80% of all of these romance stories has a love triangle attached to it by default. 2 women loving one man, 2 men loving one woman, and this story goes on. And there's this constant struggle, this constant emotional tug of war that's going on between these 3 elements within the story. All 3 characters seem to feel that they are doing what is best for them, and of course for the one they love. Our story for today is one of those stories in the Bible that has been least discussed. It's a love story that differs, it crosses all time and age, and yet it is the one story that many people forget about. The original love triangle of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel. So for those of you who are unaware of this love story, let me give you a little background. It is said that Jacob was a fugitive at the time when he was fleeing from his brother Esau. And while he was fleeing, he was obviously moving from place to place like a wanderer. And that's when he came to a place called Haran. And it is here that his eyes fell on the beautiful, the lovely Rachel. Now Rachel was also the daughter of Laban, as noted in Genesis 29:17. Laban warmly welcomed Jacob, but as is the case with most Indian marriages today, there was a dowry that not the girl had to pay the boy, but in fact the boy had to pay the girl. And here it was a price that Jacob would pay through hard labor, because that was the clause that Laban set out for him. Jacob was meant to work for Laban for 7 years. Many of you may be in a relationship right now. Many of you may be married and listening to this podcast. Look at your husbands, look at your wives, look at your spouse, look at your girlfriend or boyfriend and ask yourself, would you be willing to wait for this person for 7 long years? Many of you, and I can't see you, but I can definitely find you nodding in the negative. And that's what makes all the difference. Because instead of negotiating, instead of saying that this was all unfair, Jacob instead readily agreed to go ahead and serve Laban. And so he tended to the flocks. He took care of Laban's flocks for 7 long years. And here was Rachel patiently waiting for him. At the end of the 7 years, Jacob was happy. It says in Genesis 29:20, and Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had to her. Imagine, here is a man who was ready to do everything for the love of his life. And for him, 7 years flew off like 7 days of the week. And he toiled and he labored and he did not compromise. So, when 7 years ended, he boldly went up to Laban and he said, well, a deal is a deal and I've kept my end. And so Laban said, all right, I promised you my daughter and you shall have her. The wedding was a grand success, but there's a tiny twist in the story. For when Jacob woke up the next morning, he realized that the woman next to him was not Rachel. It was her older sister, Leah. And now suddenly, Jacob felt devastated. He felt cheated. He felt betrayed. because he was madly in love with Rachel. And he had toiled and labored for all of these years only to get another woman. And so he went to Laban. And instead of countering any of Jacob's thoughts, Laban just gave him one statement, that he couldn't possibly marry a younger daughter when there was an older one who was yet unmarried. Now Jacob was in a fix. And yet he had a choice. He had a choice where he could go forward and tell Rachel, okay, all said and done, I'm now married. And then there was another more difficult choice, the choice that led to Rachel. And so he asked Laban, I still want to marry Rachel. What do I do? And so Laban told him that he'd have to go ahead and work for him for another 7 years. Can you think about this torture for a minute? Here you are, in the land of nowhere, running away from your brother, running away from a lot of people in your life. Just think, what if you were in Jacob's place, running away from family, only to meet the love of your life and then to lose her after 7 years? So like I said before, Jacob had a choice. He could have told Laban, you know what, you've cheated me, you've betrayed me, I'm done. I'll just take Leah and get going. Instead, he served Laban another 7 years with the same perseverance, the same consistency, and the same honesty that he had for the first 7. Now, you can sympathize with Jacob, and I'm sure everyone will. But I'd like you to take a moment and think about Rachel. Because for all practical purposes, she was the one who suffered for all 14 of those years. And yet hers is the story of quiet persistence. A very quiet love that waited till it met its destination. And just so you know, Jacob had a very normal marriage because Leah gave him 6 children. So again, Rachel had a choice now. She could have told Jacob, well, you have a settled life with my sister. Maybe I should just go find myself another Jacob. And she would have found one. She was beautiful. But she chose to wait. The point I'm trying to make here is that if the love that you have is pure, you will be ready to make any amount of sacrifice. If you believe that, yes, things will work out in the end, then you should continue with the same quiet persistence that Rachel had. Make no mistake that we are not talking about a modern day story. We're talking about a story that was set thousands of years ago. And back in the day, to have more than one wife was normal. Today it isn't, and it shouldn't. Circumstances were different. Societal practices were different. So we can't go ahead and comment on whether it was right or wrong. The point is that given the fact that the societal norms of the day permitted Jacob to have a second wife, he did exactly what he was told to do. He waited, he persisted, and he finally got Rachel. Now, most of you, especially who don't know the story, would have said, okay, finally at least, there's some peace. There's a happily ever after. Again, that was not to be. Because while Leah had 6 children, the unloved Leah had 6 children, and Jacob's entire heart and mind was vested in Rachel. Rachel did not have children for a very, very long time. So here's a lady who's waited for 14 years to win the love of her life. She gets married to him, only to find out that she would be called barren for the next couple of years. And yet they kept the faith. I mentioned this in an earlier episode that the Bible is all about flawed characters. It's all about highlighting human flaws. But it's also about how, as a believer, we hold on to our faith. And the truth is that Rachel held on to her faith, which is why, in the end, she was blessed with Joseph and later Benjamin. So, if your love is true, and if you're going through a very hard time achieving what you want to, there are so many cases these days where someone's running away with someone. There are stories of men eloping with young women. But the truth is that if you really have a love story in the making, then stand by it. Because if you are a believer, then your faith will ultimately help you reach your destination. And as I keep saying, Jacob and Rachel both had a choice. A choice to move on, a choice to move away from each other, a choice to give up on that pure love that they shared. And yet they didn't. They did not give up on their love. So ask yourself, if two people thousands of years ago with societal norms in place where they could have easily gotten married, still waited for 14 long years, could you not wait for a few months, for a few days, before families can meet, greet, talk to each other? Can you not wait? The Bible is all about hope. Christians are all about hope. And sometimes we find ourselves waiting to break free from society. And it is at this time that you need to hold on to your faith even more tighter. Because that's what's going to help you reach your destination. That's what's going to help you achieve your love. You don't have to go and elope with your friend. Instead, you've got to pray about it. You've got to stand there and you've got to deal with it. Deal with it knowing that there's a God above and He has your best interests in His mind. And if for some reason you don't end up with the person you love, you just have to ask yourself whether you've done enough, and if the answer is in the positive, then maybe God had a different plan. Accepting God's plan for you is as important as you making a plan for yourself. Sometimes the former being more important. So if you've enjoyed this episode on Chasing Hope and it has brought you some ray of light and hope in your life, please write into us, let us know what you feel. And if you have a prayer request, feel free to send them in. Don't forget that we have all our previous episodes of Season 1 uploaded on www.chasinghopewithkatherine.com. Get in touch with us on Twitter, on Facebook. We're waiting to hear from you. For now, thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to meeting you on the other side in another episode. Until then, stay safe and be cautious.